What's up, Photoshop fam? I'm Rick Navarro, and this is the Pixel Laundry Photoshop Academy. Now, I want to talk a little bit about how you use these in combination with each other to get the best results. Those are not the only selection tools you have to your disposal, even though these are the tools that you will probably use the most. Another selection tool that you can use in conjunction with these is the pen tool, which is actually located down here, over here in your vector tools. And I'll explain vectors in a later lesson, but I just want you to be made aware of the fact that the pen tool can be used to create selections just like any of your other selection tools, but it's going to do it with what is called paths. Now, your pen tool works with these points called vertices and these little handles called Bezier handles. And the Bezier handle is a little tool that allows you to create curves like this section right here, right? So if I click and add a point and hold it down and then drag, I get a Bezier handle. That selection is not going to end up very clean. So what do I do to tighten up the edge? Let me go ahead and finish this selection here all the way to the top again, and I'll show you how to clean up those edges. So I've finished the path. Now I want to get in here and adjust some of these vertices and these points because they're not on my selection. So if I hit A, and again, it's going to come down here to this section. Like I said, these are grouped into sections. It's going to come down here into this section here. This section here is known as drawing and or your type tools. And here it's called a path selection or a direct selection. In Illustrator, I believe it's known as your object selection or your component selection. I like that definition a little bit better because it helps you understand exactly what you're grabbing. Basically, this white arrow, if the arrow is white, it is the component and it's going to allow you to manipulate the components of the path. So in this particular case, the vertices are what you're going to grab. So if I click and drag and select over, you'll notice that the vertice that I've selected is turned solid. If I select over here, that one will turn solid. If I select over here, that one will turn solid. If I click on this and grab it, it will allow me to move it. If I use the black or the solid arrow or what's called the object tool, it's going to grab the entire path. Notice how they all went solid. So if I grab this and move it, it's going to move everything. I don't want that, so I'm going to make sure I'm on the correct tool. So I'm going to hold Shift and click on A. Again, I'm going to cycle through my tools. I'm going to grab this one and I'm going to move it into place. Now, this one here, I've already created a Bezier handle. If you'll notice, if I click on it, it gives me handles on both sides. And if I turn that, it's going to turn both sides. Well, what if I just need one side? What you want to do is line it up, and if you hold down the Option or Alt, it's going to break the connection of those Bezier handles. It's going to allow me to manipulate just the side that I am working on. And that's how you would fix a section with a curve. Now, what about if I clicked and I didn't create Bezier curves and now I need them for some reason? There is another tool under your pen tool palette called the Convert Point tool that will allow me to create Beziers if I have not created them already. Notice that when I hover over the point, it turns into the tool. Now, if I click and drag, my handles will come out. And then from here, I can go back to my selection tool or my component tool, hold down Alt or Option, and manipulate them as I see fit. Once I have broken the connection here, then these are going to operate independently of each other, so I no longer need to hold it down. If I need them to move together, again, I can hold down the Alt or Option key and you'll see it's moving like it originally did. But when I want to break it, and I've already done it, now it's going to operate as an individual Bezier handle. So that's how you would do that with paths. Now, how do you convert this into the little marching ants to make it a selection? Because technically it's not a selection yet. Right now it's a path. Well, the way you do that is you hold down your command or your control key and you hit enter and it converts it into a selection. And just like we were using them before, it's going to use the similar attributes of these first 4 selection tools, and you can use them as you normally would. If you saw how long it took, I probably fast forwarded that section of the video so that you didn't have to sit through and watch it. Like, what if I needed to path this entire bathing suit out because now they wanted it to be solid for some reason? Well, to do that with a path, it's going to take a pretty long time. Or if I needed to cut out this arm because I needed to replace it with an arm that had a different position. I can use a combination of these techniques in order to give me a pretty good selection. I'm actually going to go back to the quick selection tool because that gave me a pretty fast selection. Now I'm basically just using a combination of these tools together to get one solid selection. Let's go back to our polygonal lasso because this is pretty straight. I'm going to hold down my alter option. I'm going to click all along this edge to make sure none of this bathing suit is selected because all I want is the skin. To get round edges with the polygonal lasso tool, you have to click more times to create more points. So on these kind of rounder shapes, I'm just putting down a lot more points. Marquee tool, I'm going to get rid of that. And everything else looks pretty tight. Now that could work, right? So if I duplicate that, if I hit my Command and J, it's going to duplicate that. But let's take a look at that selection and see if it was as good as we think it is. And in order to see it, I'm just going to create a solid layer here. And we'll put it a real bright layer. I'm going to move it under just so we can see. And for the most part, it's pretty good. Okay. It's not a horrible selection. A few little white spots. This can all be cleaned up with either an eraser or I can remake the selection. And I want to show you what the difference between this selection is with a wand tool and what something like a pen tool might make. So without having to go back too far, I've just loaded this selection by holding down the command, putting my mouse over the layer that we just created, and I'm going to select, and that's going to load a selection for me. So I'm going to go back to our original layer. Instead of just duplicating that, because that's what we did to create that duplication, I'm going to go to the Paths menu here. I've already created that first one. So let's go ahead and create a new layer here. And I'm going to click on this little button right here. And this is a Make Work Path from Selection button. And if I click on that, it's going to convert my path into a selection. Now, again, for the most part, it's pretty tight. But before I reconvert this path back into a selection, I want to double check it for things like this, because it's going to get it pretty close, but it's not going to be super, super tight. So I just want to make sure that my selection is as tight as it possibly can be. Okay, so I've just gone through and made sure that the selection is pretty tight. And as you can see, that took a little bit of time to kind of make sure that it was super perfect. Now you might ask, why would you take the time to go through and make sure that that is all super tight? Or why would you even use paths in the first place? And here is the reason why, is that the difference between the wand tool and your pen tool is how it calculates the information. The pen tool is going to give you the tightest and the best types of selection when you are making selections where that's possible. Obviously, if you're selecting hair, you're not going to pen tool out every single strand of hair. But in this particular case, if I've got a few minutes and I need to make a really tight selection, or if I know that this image is going to be blown up very, very large, let's say I'm creating a movie poster that's going to be seen in a very large format and it's going to be printed, but I'm using this method to clip out this person from the photo shoot to create a composite, I need that edge to be super, super tight. So after I've created this edge, I'm going to reconvert this back into a selection. Again, hold command, hit enter, and then I'm going to duplicate that. And let's take a look at that selection. Let's move it over and take a look at our other selection. I want you guys to notice the difference between this edge and this edge. Notice how this edge is really sharp and this edge is a little soft. It's a little fuzzy, okay? Let's go all the way around and take a look at other portions of it so you can kind of see what I'm saying. Notice right here, see how sharp this is versus how soft this is, okay? Same thing right here, all the way around the edge. I'm not talking about what has been selected. I'm just talking about the edge of the selection itself. The path tool is going to give you a far sharper selection and a more crisp edge, in which case, or I should say in some cases, it will require that level of detail. Also, when you're using a low resolution image or an image with not a lot of pixel information, that wand tool selection are not going to give you as strong of a result as a pen tool is going to give you. And the reason is because it's using the actual colors of the pixels as opposed to vector information. Now, if you're not familiar with what vectors are basically math calculations that the computer is doing to give you a super sharp edge. Basically zeros and ones, right? Math calculations that are giving you a super fine and refined edge. For example, like a graphic you might create in Illustrator would be a vector. An image in Photoshop is going to be a raster image. What that is basically pixel density. And it is calculating the amount of pixel density or information in a square inch. There's a term called PPI or DPI, which stands for dots per square inch or pixels per square inch. And it is using the amount of information in amount of space. If I take that information and stretch it, it's only going to have the information that I started with. So it has to fill in the blanks and the image gets softer. If I compress it, technically it should get sharper because I'm taking the amount of information and squeezing it together so the information is more compact. Whereas if I stretch it, it's going to lose quality or it's going to degrade. In Illustrator, if you do that with a vector image, you can stretch it infinitely because it's calculating the numbers to get to a larger size and never lose quality. Okay, so this is why you might use a pen tool versus a selection tool in Photoshop to get a sharper selection or a sharper edge. Okay, so I have this other image here. I wanted to show you how some of these other tools work on solid colors. If I come in here and grab the magic wand tool, I can easily make that selection very quickly. Same thing with the quick selection tool. If I drag across the color, it's going to make that selection very quickly. Now this allows me to come in here and change the color of this object. Based off of my selection, I can create a solid color and hit OK. And now you can kind of see what I was talking about here with the edges, how the edges aren't super tight. And that's because I've used that method, that wand selection tool. Now, if I come in here and do it with a path, which I've already created this path for us, so it'd be faster, and then I hit Command and Enter, and I do the exact same thing. Create a solid edge. Notice the difference in the edge. What you have here is what we call anti-aliasing or aliasing, where the edges are almost acting like little steps. You're getting these jagged edges and it gives you kind of poor edges. And on a high level, your edges need to be pretty tight. So instead of using a color-based selection, I'm going to use a vector-based selection, and that's going to give me a much tighter edge. Now I could take this and change the color or change the blend mode to put it something like that. And now I've got a layer that allows me to change colors of a bottom very quickly. If I wanted to, I could come in here and maybe sample a color that already exists to kind of tie the image together. I wouldn't use a color fill on this. That's an entirely other lesson, but you can see how making selections is pretty important and pretty crucial to everything you're going to do in Photoshop. Okay, so I've got this one last example I want to show you. This is a model on white here with a pretty white sky, and it looks like it was a pretty overcast day, but it's beachwear, so you kind of want it to be bright and sunny. And how to use your selections in order to make a selection to composite in a sky. So I have another video on how to make a selection using channels, and I would recommend that. I'll put that up here right now for you to see. But this is going to be the best way to get a good selection on the hair. But I also wanted to show you this one cool thing that Photoshop has included in this particular version, or in the last few versions, I believe, of Photoshop in order to make selections relatively cool. Just like I would in any of the other ones, I'm going to go to my wand and notice that up here I've got a select subject button. If I click on this, Photoshop is going to read the image and make a selection for me. And at first glance, it's actually a pretty good selection. It's not super tight, but it is pretty darn close to what I need it to be. Before I use that, what I want to do is deal with this hair, since this is going to be the hardest portion of it. Now, as I mentioned, I'm not going to explain this because I've already created an entire separate video on that, and that you should check out. That will show you how to do this, but I'm going to go through this very quickly. Okay, so now that I have my selection made, I'm going to take one last little glance here and make sure that there isn't anything that I'm missing or anything that needs to be removed. And then I'm going to duplicate this layer, drag it up here to the top, and I'm going to bring in my sky. Now, I'm not going to get too deep into the background because that's not what this lesson is about. But as you can see here, because I've made tight selections, I've got the hairs, I've got details, and she's blending in, or I should say the sky is blending in rather nicely with her because my selections are strong. If I make poor selections in the hair or in the body, this background is not going to sit as tightly as it is sitting right now. I can use her as a mask herself to kind of brighten things up, just maybe on her. And maybe I want to fill in some of these midtones a little bit, and I can add a few of these little layer adjustments to kind of add some more pop to her. This is where we started. This is where we are. Might bring that levels down a little bit. Keep that exposure nice and clean. And there you go. All right, guys, thank you so much for watching. That is Selections Lesson 2. There is a lot of information there. And the reason is because selections are super important. Practice with that, use different combinations with it, play with an image, use it in layers, make selections, drag them around, create duplicate layers, use the different tools, try patterns, try solids, try organic shapes, try all the tools, okay? Play, you can't break it, use an image that you don't need, and at the end, don't save it. All right, guys, thank you so much for watching. Make sure you like, subscribe, hit that notification bell. Create every day, Photoshop fam. We'll catch you next time. Bye.